Welcome to one of the biggest battery comparisons of the year. We've got both new OnePlus 8 series phones, the iPhone, we've got Samsung's S20 Ultra, and Huawei's P40 Pro. So for a lot of people, these are the absolute best phones we'll see till September later this year. Now, none of these phones have alarmingly small batteries. That's a good start. The smallest capacity actually goes to the iPhone, with 3,969 mAh, with Huawei and OnePlus sitting a little ahead of that, and Samsung with a tank of a 5,000 mAh cell at the top. We've just finished playing a game for 10 minutes, and now we're going to open up Zoom, which is a pretty popular video calling app at the moment. So I'm going to set up the meeting on one phone and join in with the other four phones. Well, there's a sentence I didn't think I'd be saying. Where we do have massive variation is in displays. There's a size difference, sure. The S20 Ultra is an enormous phone, but even more significant than that is the difference in refresh rates. All phones here are set to their default screen settings, which is what most people will use them on, but that means different things for different phones. Some will run at 60Hz refresh rate, some at 90, and some will run at 120 frames per second. I get a lot of comments about this, things like you should have set them all to the same 60Hz refresh rate to make it fair, but you've got to remember, if you're buying a 120Hz or a 90Hz phone, part of what you're paying for is that experience of using those higher refresh rate panels. And when you combine that with the fact that by default, this is what those phones are set to, I think the current settings are how 90% of people will use each of these phones. Bringing things back to the test for a second, you've probably noticed we've been on Instagram for a while now, so what I've done partway through is kicked it up a notch by starting a screen recording on each phone while doing it. In terms of the screen resolutions, the OnePlus 8 Pro, OnePlus 8 and Samsung, they'll all come at 1080p out the box, while iPhone and Huawei are sharper and actually can't come down to 1080p. Okay, but there's more to the story than just what display panels these phones have. So worth mentioning is chipsets. Almost every flagship Android phone this year will run on a Snapdragon 865 chip. So that's the one you see in both OnePlus phones and the Samsung. I've covered this in another video, but Samsung does also have an Exynos variant, but seeing as the Snapdragon is the better performing version this year, it's the one I'll be using. Huawei and Apple are two of the only companies that both use their own in-house chipsets, which might in theory mean they can optimize battery even more, but we'll find out. So far at least, that does appear to be working. The iPhone is actually in the lead, with Samsung and Huawei pretty closely following it behind. Both new OnePlus phones not performing amazingly so far. It's actually quite an interesting result just between the two OnePlus phones. I was almost surprised the 8 Pro is ahead at all. That phone does have a bigger battery, yes, but barely, and you'd kind of think that its 120Hz refresh rate would suck a lot more battery than the 90 on the non-Pro phone. But I think I know the culprit. It turns out the normal OnePlus 8 comes with older LPDDR4X RAM, which is quite a bit less power efficient than the LPDDR5 seen on the Pro, and a lot of high-end 2020 flagships. In terms of what we're doing on the phones now, we're on Twitch, which is a live streaming app that I barely ever use, and you might be able to tell that the OnePlus 8 has already reached now 35% battery left. A couple of things to bear in mind though. First of all, that with these battery tests, I can't possibly factor in the battery that you'd lose when your phone is on standby in a normal day, but to try and compensate for that, I've made it slightly more intense versus a normal day of use. And so it's nearly been 4 hours, and I would consider a phone that lasts 5 hours to have good battery life. That's always the benchmark I use. What's actually more impressive to me right now though is how well the iPhone and the S20 Ultra are doing. The last time I did a battery test on the S20 Ultra, I was using the Exynos version of the phone, because that's the one you get here in the UK, but already I can see that the Snapdragon is performing far better. And the iPhone, while maybe from the front with its thicker borders and its notch, it is starting to look a little dated versus the others, its battery life is just phenomenal, and I would argue that's more important. Okay, we've just passed the 5-hour mark, so almost as a commemorative treat to these phones, we're moving to a slightly lighter task, which is basically to play a 480p video using the phone's internal video players. And now, from one of the lightest tasks you can do on your phone, we're going to swing straight to one of the heaviest. We're going to open up the camera and start recording 4K video on each phone. This is going to really push them to their limits, and they're going to lose a lot of battery very quickly. Interesting to note at this point is that while towards the start of the test the Huawei was doing incredibly well, considering it doesn't have the biggest battery and it has a high refresh rate display, it's now come more into line with the OnePlus 8 Pro. They're sitting at almost exactly the same level. OnePlus 8 is pretty much just about to die, but at the same time we're well into the 6-hour mark, so in my books this is good battery life. But I'm kind of curious now. If you were given a smartphone that could go all the way up to a insanely sharp Quad HD Plus resolution, and it could go up to an incredibly fast 120Hz refresh rate, what setting would you put it on? Would you put it on the absolute best display settings but then get the worst battery life? Or would you find some sort of compromise? Or would you just put it on low resolution and low refresh rate and get maximum battery? It's an interesting question because taking a look at the Galaxy S20 Ultra, that phone is on track right now to hit an exceptional score in this test. And that is with its demanding 120Hz refresh rate on. So if you took that off, if you set this phone to just its normal 1080p resolution and 60Hz, you might be looking at 9, even 10 hours of continuous screen on time, which is just off the charts. But then, at that stage, does it matter? If you're going to get through a day anyway, then would you rather just have a slightly better viewing experience? Let me know. Bringing this back to the test, you can see we're about to have two casualties, but OnePlus you're about to see is going to cling on to this 1% figure for a really long time. This could be a purposeful decision to give people a chance to run and grab a charger. It's tough to say when it comes to batteries, but what we can say is that OnePlus 8 Pro and Huawei P40 Pro, they're trading blows when it comes to battery life. Anyways, time to just fast forward this whole thing and let's talk about the results. So, in 5th place was the OnePlus 8. You knew that already, but the time was 6 hours and 20. That falls very much into the good category. Impressive, but it won't blow you away. But if you did lower that refresh rate to 60Hz, you could potentially move it up another tier. Okay, next up was Huawei P40 Pro, and this is a tier above. This is bordering on the category that I would call very good battery life. Huawei's done something good with the software, considering this is a high-resolution, high-refresh rate panel and not the biggest battery. Even better is OnePlus 8 Pro. It's amazing. We're at a stage where you can have 120Hz on your smartphone and still get amazing battery life. This is an example of that. But then, a tier above that, the S20 Ultra. 8 hours and 19 minutes with 120Hz on. This is just exceptional battery life, if you get the Snapdragon version. And then, I'm hesitant to call it the winner here, because obviously each phone is using a different refresh rate, but assuming you used each phone on their default settings, what comes out the box, you'll probably get the absolute best battery life on the iPhone 11 Pro Max. 8 hours 26 is a very, very long time with continuous screen on usage. If you haven't already seen my full camera comparison, do check that out, would be really, really appreciated. And with that being said,